Hello, folks. It's Mikey here. So, welcome back to Daryl. He's been on a break. Tell us about your break, Daryl.
Yay, down in Cornwall, right at the end of Cornwall where there is nobody. So Cape Cornwall.
I dare
And
say it
yeah,
was a bit breezy there, was it?
it was breezy, yes. The birds, seagulls and crows mainly, there were a few choughs. And yeah, they didn't have to make much effort because the wind was keeping them afloat, which is very nice for them.
Yeah, they
Um,
they love playing in a stiff
yeah,
breeze. So
yes.
I'll not make anything the fact that Daryl has to leave Devon to go on holiday to a different place.
But
So
it's a tradition.
we had some feedback from a listener. So we've got a listener, Daryl.
Wow.
And
How did that
he
happen?
said that I uh, interrupted your flow at a critical moment when you were about to explain how you would explain to a CEO your kind of elevator pitch on S curves. So I'm going to give you that chance uninterrupted.
Not that I'm ready for it. Yeah, not that there's an elevator pitch for CEOs on S curves either. I think we were discussing the idea that lots of people, and especially senior executives, say that they understand what S curves are, um, but really sufficiently to be able to recognise that it's relevant to them also. So I think the what's happened is that S curves are have been kind of um, socialized as far as, oh, there's an S curve for this industry. Yeah, there's an S curve for this technology, but I don't think people recognize just quite how all pervasive it is, and that they're literally everywhere. Um, so I'm not sure whether there's such a thing as an elevator pitch for S curves for executives, because they're all different. Um, I know we keep talking about there are certain themes, there are orange thinkers, people with power, etc. But at the same time, I think it all comes down to personal experience. And can you say something which resonates with an experience they've had? And the closest probably is there's an S curve for all of us, or S curves, a whole series of S curves for us in our lives. And so when somebody gets promoted to become a CEO, for example, or promoted to become part of the SLT, then whether they like it or not, they've just been shifted into a new S curve. So, yeah, so I think one of the most famous coaching books there is, Marshall Goldsmith, "What Got You Here Won't Get You There," is a book that's never mentions the word S curves, but it's all about that. When you've been promoted into a new position, um, yeah, then you've actually been moved to a new S curve. So all of the skills that made you successful with the previous way of doing things, if you keep on doing those things, then it's probably not going to go so well for you, because you've now been thrown into a new world, and that requires you to be doing different things and requires different skills from you. So in that sense, an S curve is basically the way you were doing stuff, and when you've been promoted, then you're now expected to be doing different stuff. So there's one of those situations where you could say that you've been thrown onto the next S curve, or you volunteered for it. But yeah, I think that's where we start to get this dissonance that people tend not to recognise that it's a new S curve now.
So I suppose it's a bit like saying when you start a new position, you're thrown in at the deep end. But the key thing is, uh, to some extent, a lot of the stuff that you learned to get to the surface in your previous life doesn't actually apply anymore. Would that be right?
I think so. Yeah. Again, I think that Marshall Goldsmith title, I think, says it really well. What got you here won't get you there. So yeah, all those skills that's uh, highlighted you as a person who should be promoted. Yeah, I think there's a tendency with a lot of people to think, okay, well, that's the stuff that got me promoted, so I need to keep doing that. Whereas I think the promotion basically means that no, you're in a different role now. So I think when we were at Rolls-Royce, I think it was a bit like the joining the dark side. So you're either an engineer or you're a manager. But if you're an engineer and you get promoted, inverted commas, to become a manager, then it's very clear, I think, that I now need to be doing different things. But I think I also recognise that a lot of those engineers that have now become managers still want to be engineers and still think it's my engineering skill that got me here. So I just need to continue being a good engineer. Whereas you've now got a whole bunch of people who are going to do the engineering for you. You're kind of like the safety check. Yeah, are we doing the right engineering? But it's much more about the people skills, the EQ side of things. And with engineers, that often doesn't go down so well. Because I think the other factor that makes people blind to these S curve jumps is there is a trauma. There's an ordeal that goes with it, and if that ordeal is emotional intelligence related, it's very tempting to say, "Oh no, I can get away without that." But I think reality is you can't.
So what strikes me about what you've said is that a lot of the 40 principles, for instance, they're about making the jump to the next S curve, finding the way to do it,
I think that's right. So Joseph Campbell, when he was talking about Hero of the Thousand Voices and this whole idea of what is a story all about, what is a good movie all about, it's about an S curve jump, although even he never used the term S curve. But you did talk about the ordeal. So why do we love movies? Because the hero encounters an ordeal, the impossible problem. In my language, that's the contradiction. And the 40 principles are basically the discovery that there are millions of ways of solving that ordeal badly, but there are only very small numbers of ways of doing it well. So they're like provocations, if you like, that say once you've identified what your ordeal is, then there are only 40 ways out of it.
So for your engineer who's been promoted to suddenly have to start using soft skills, are the 40 principles a useful toolkit to point them in the right direction, kind of retroactively?
It's a really tricky one. So I have to say yes, because when it comes to generating a solution, it's the 40 principles or it's nothing, basically. But I think one of my I'll say my worst days was over in Korea. I'm known as the father of business triz, which you think, okay, that's kind of cool. So if I get invited to go over there, then it'd be great. But when I did, then what happened was everybody that I encountered there that was now thinking about business triz, they thought it meant the 40 principles, and they thought that's all it meant. And I think, unfortunately, when you get into a complex world of people and soft skills, then solving the contradiction is really the easy bit. The challenging bit is finding what the contradiction is, or finding out of all of the contradictions that are surrounding you, which are the ones that I should be dealing with right now. And nobody in Korea at the time, and this is going back 10, 12 years now, really wanted to engage with any of the tools that were about finding what those ordeals were and finding what the contradictions were. So I think, unfortunately, it's very tempting. And I think the evidence from Korea says it's really tempting to pick up the 40 principles and go with them and say, okay, that's all you need. But the reality is, no, that's the icing on the cake once you've done all the hard work of plowing your way through the complexity.
Okay, well, thank you for that answer. I threw you in at the deep end, and you're having to find your own way. So I'm trying to show some more humility today, Daryl.
Why? Why would you do that?
I don't know, because I'm a bit random. That's why. So I won't come out with some of the normal trash I normally do. So for today's episode, the it's called 11.5 million. We'll come back onto that one. And as a reserve subject, because I think we won't spend all the time on the 11.5 million, we can talk about an email that Daryl sent me, because I found this wonderful YouTube talk by my all-time hero. I can't remember his name. Yuval Harari, historian, philosopher, best-selling author. And I could have written the first line of Daryl's reply,
I'm nothing but
which is,
predictable.
he doesn't understand S-curves, I think. So, which makes me, in my humility, think, well, I probably don't bloody understand, because I don't know how we wound that into it. I have no idea whatsoever. So we will delve into that. So let's talk about 11.5 million.
Yes.
So I had the pleasure of being on one of Daryl's courses, and it was about problem solving, and it was very entertaining and informative, and we got to meet a wonderful bunch of people on there. So it was all good. And one of the slides that Daryl nonchalantly throws up on these courses is to say, we have got 11.5 million case studies. So what are those case studies?
There are a whole variety of things, but I'm going to use the C word again. They're all about contradictions. So if you say, okay, well, everything starts from S curves, everything leads from that to hero's journey and jumping from one S curve to the next S curve, then the 11.5 million case studies are essentially people who've been through those ordeals, predominantly technical ordeals, because the biggest source of data for all of this stuff is patent and patent database. So that's where we started, because that's where the TRIZ researchers before us started, because the patents are essentially inventions, so novel solutions, and a large proportion of them involve some kind of contradiction. So I'm trying to achieve this, but if I look at the prior art, everybody's failed to do it because of all these reasons, and I've magically solved that contradiction, and here's my brilliant new solution. So what we've been doing since 1999 is reverse engineer all those situations where somebody's identified a contradiction and has then, in their eyes at least, identified a breakthrough solution to it. So what we do is find the contradiction, first of all, and then reverse engineer the solution strategy that the person develops to solve the contradiction. So it's a little bit more complicated than that, because most people, most inventors think they've solved contradictions, but actually what they've done is they've moved the trade-off from one place to another. So it's remained fairly consistent over the course of doing this job. But when we first started analyzing patents, it was essentially done manually. So the rate of accumulation to get to 11.5 million started very much on the flat part of an S curve itself. That's because reading through patents manually, we had a team of probably 20 maximum doing that job in the beginning. Is quite slow.
So Daryl, let me stop your flow for a minute, because I like the sound of my own voice.
Excellent.
When you say you reverse engineer them, is that effectively you're trying to identify the principles that were deployed in solving that contradiction?
That's essentially what it comes down to. Yeah. So once you found the contradiction, then if somebody has genuinely solved that contradiction and made a step change, so they've made that S curve jump, then our job in the reverse engineering part, at least, is okay, well, what strategy did that person use, or what combination of strategies did that person use? So I guess the hidden question behind that bit of research we do is, has this person found a 41st inventive strategy? So, in other words, have they done something which nobody else has done previously? And the answer to that question throughout the whole time we've been doing it is no. It's whatever people have done to successfully solve a contradiction. It is going to be one or a combination of those 40 principles. But
So, so Darryl, one of the things that really fascinates me about this is firstly that when that slide comes up and there's 11.5 million, it doesn't have an impact. It doesn't have an emotional
yeah,
impact on me.
yeah, yeah. I think I think it's pretty consistent. It's one of our, I'll say, unsolved contradictions. So it's, yeah. How many case studies do you need to give people before they recognise, oh gosh, you've done something important here? Um, and we've had some fairly traumatic journey debts with clients trying to work out, okay, so how many do you need? I think where we're at is you don't need that many. Actually, what you need are relevant case studies that you can show to people, and more importantly, you need a story that goes with it, because people don't, generally speaking, learn from data; they learn from stories. So, tell us a story in which a contradiction gets solved. But
Right.
you
Okay.
need,
Okay. So sharp listeners who listened to last episode will have noted that I proved using my extensive research of looking at 5 TED Talks that humour was critical to the best talks. So
yeah,
there's a big difference between 5 and 11.5 million. So
there is, yeah.
just acquaint me with what you were trying to do, because that's a lot of money you spent on there. And I was thinking, if I was
Mm.
your boss, you kept back to me. He said, I'm up to 2 million, but I want more. And I'd say, naff off, go and do something better with your time. How many do you want? So
Yeah,
I've equated it in my mind right now with collecting guitars.
with
So what were you trying to prove?
so one of the things that we do see is, and periodically we have reissued the tools. So we're on the third version of the business contradiction matrix, for example. We're on the fourth version of the technical tool. So even though we consistently do not find a 41st invented principle, what you do find is that the strategies that engineers, leaders, software engineers, whoever, use to solve particular contradictions, they do evolve over time. So if my job in life is to say to you or to anybody that's got a contradiction they want to solve, okay, well, yeah, here's a ranked list of the strategies that other people have used, then I need to contextualize that and say, okay, well, um, right now, here is the ranked list. But what that also means is 10 years ago, it would have been a quite different list. So as the world
Ah,
evolves and changes, then the types of strategy from that list of 40, that very definitely has evolved and shifted.
okay. So you're a first principles man. So my
Yeah.
first kind of crack at this would be to say, well, if these principles are so profound, I wouldn't expect them to evolve at all. But you're saying it in the context of society, that changes the way people apply them. Is that what you're saying?
Uh, it, it, not the way that people apply them. I think it's just the which principles are going to be relevant to you right now. So, for example, it's if you step back and think about big picture patterns, then clearly in the last, particularly in the last 20, 25 years, the world has made an enormous leap into the world of digital. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I'm getting you. I'm
Yeah.
getting you.
So the inventive principle that tells you, oh right, you need to make that digital jump yourself now is principle 28. Okay. So if you look at the contradiction tool from the 1970s, then it had an awful lot of advice in it that says okay, you've now hit the limit of what a mechanical system can do. You now need to go digital. You need to go to some kind of a field-based solution, for example. So that was really useful advice in the 1970s because not everybody was thinking about digital. Uh, Today, then almost everybody's thought about digital. So there's no point in having a matrix that says, yeah, okay, this mechanical solution needs to go digital because everybody's already kind of worked that out for themselves. So people have now made the jump to digital. They still encountered contradictions, but they're different contradictions. But Inventive Principle 28, the one that tells you to go digital, is now no longer relevant to you. So if you look at if you made an overall ranked list of the inventive principles and how often they get used, then 30, 40 years ago, Principle 28 was really high on the list of importance. Yeah, think about this one. Today, it really is much lower down the list, and it's kind of one of those principles that everybody kind of shrugs their shoulders and says, "Well, yeah, that's pretty obvious, isn't it?"
Okay, so if we go to the other extreme, and I'm a caveman, and I'm inventing the wheel, I'm not thinking, "Oh, should I make this into a field? Should I turn it
No,
into a service?" Because those opportunities aren't available to you because of the state of the context, the technology at the time.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's so that seems it is contextual, but it's the state of technology and the technological options open to you.
Very definitely. Yes, and so the Matrix will still recommend to mechanical engineers that are stuck in that caveman world or their version of it, because some industries evolve far more quickly than others. That's if you want to get out of the problems you've got, then jump into a non-mechanical solution is the way you need to do it. And here's the evidence of literally now hundreds of thousands of people who've been in situations similar to yours, and the only way out of that mechanical trap is now to go to a non-mechanical solution.
So if somebody invents time travel tomorrow,
Mm.
that's a bit far out, but go with it. Would that be another principle?
It depends how they did it. I think. Time travel is one of those abstract concepts, isn't it? So you can see that time travel would solve a whole bunch of contradictions. But when I talk about reverse engineering, how did you solve that contradiction? Then time travel is just, I think, it's just way too abstract. I think you
Yeah,
need to
we
know.
can't handle it. We can't. Okay, so how about AI then? Which principle says I should exploit AI and make my products think for themselves?
I think there's several principles point in that direction. So another principle that's moved down the priority lists and the usage list considerably is principle 23, which is feedback. So again, back in the 1970s, adding feedback into a system was a fairly novel thing to do because it wasn't easy to do it. Yeah, now of course with digital, it is easy. And so Principle 23 says you need feedback loops. And then in terms of more specifically AI, then Principle 26 talks about copying. So make a digital copy of something. And then if you really want to push the AI journey to its endpoint, or what we might currently think of as its endpoint, is Principle 25, which says what you need are systems which are self-updating, autonomous, autopoietic, and look after themselves basically.
Okay, so so have you got off the hook then for being kind of obsessive like Newton, who tried to, became an alchemist in his later days? And you're kind of,
Uh,
I thought you had this sort of quest for the 40-second principle, and that was going to.
because of my love of Douglas Adams, then I still have kind of a sneaking ambition to end my career with we've now found the 40-second inventive principle. So Douglas Adams was right all along. But I don't think there's even a hint of a 41st principle, never mind 42nd.
Okay, so,
We,
so I'm
we
also
keep looking.
interested. I'm also interested in the practicalities of this because now I'm obviously a super intelligent person, but I've only managed to learn two principles actually. There's which is the other way around, which is a good one, and
There's a
then
good one.
there's principle three, which is local quality. Is that right?
Yeah, if I look at patents that we've generated either for ourselves or for clients, then Principle Three's been a big hitter.
Oh,
Yeah.
right. Because
So you've
well, it
chosen
doesn't
two good
surprise
ones.
me, Daryl, because my current working theory, if you want elucidation, because I kind of quite like classifying things, and I end up with spreadsheets and I classify things and I try and put them into categories. And I always end up unfailingly with one called miscellaneous. So I reckon
Yeah.
you snuck one in there, and I reckon principle three is your miscellaneous because I haven't a clue what it is really. It's kind of something.
Well, that workshop was useful then. Uh,
well, well, I'm not the most diligent student, so I wouldn't blame it all on you, Daryl.
no, I think I mean I totally take the miscellaneous comment on board, but I think actually that's Principle 35, which is called parameter changes, which is just like the yeah,
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
I'm pretty certain the original researchers, they I mean the numbering of the principles comes from just the chronological order in which they found things, and then I think they got a big way through the research as they saw it and said, okay, let's go look in the miscellaneous bucket now and see what we've got left over. And that was at the time they'd got 34 principles, and they said, oh, you know what, damn it, let's just make principle 35 and put all the miscellaneous shit inside that bucket.
So did you go into that bucket and tease them out into subcategories in effect?
Yes, and to be honest, to be fair to the original researcher, they did it as well. It's just that the label you end up with it's just gives you that sinking feeling in your stomach whenever the tools recommend. Oh yeah, Principle 35 is what other people have used to solve this problem.
Right,
Um,
right.
but yeah, having said all that, the every attempt that we've made to reclassify these principles into a more logical structure has produced considerable amounts of hate mail.
Ah, but don't you lap that up, Daryl? Don't you like that?
Well, it's so how do you solve that contradiction? So I want to honour the original research. So we still talk about 40 principles. I mean, there's lots of material out there on it. So in that sense, it becomes like the QWERTY keyboard. But with the Trendy and A book, for example, which was targeted at marketing people, then were they going to learn 40 principles? Were they going to go and look at the original TRIZ research? Absolutely not. So in that book, at the back, we talk about, okay, well, here's these 18 strategies. Because I think if you really condense 40 principles down and say, let's take out all the overlap and say, okay, so what are the core principles here? There's 18 of them.
Daryl, now you're talking my language. I could conceivably learn 18 things in my lifetime, but never ever 40. So I shall have to check that out. So
Yes.
the other interesting thing is the actual practicality of this, because you're recruiting people to do when you started with people to do a pretty complex task, I
Yeah.
reckon.
Hmm.
So how did you overcome that? Because I wouldn't know how to go about it. It's really hard. It's really, really hard.
Yeah. So one of the core ideas behind Triz is someone somewhere solved your problem. So when we said, okay, let's do our version of the original Soviet research, we said, okay, well, who's solved that problem today? And this is late 1990s, and that was a time in history when it was possible to subscribe to um, patent summary databases. So there were people whose job was to summarize patents uh, um, and transform them from the usual legalese into something that an engineer, for example, could read this summary and get the gist of the invention. So we said,
Oh,
okay, well,
so
we need
what was,
we need some of those
sorry,
people.
sorry, yeah. Was the purpose of those publications so because one of the jobs of a patent person, I guess, is to check that it's unique. And in order to check it's unique, they've got a billion things to kind of look through to say, has somebody written this before? Which is an interesting task in itself.
Yeah. So I think those search strategies have always been around. They've always been, well, so if we go back to the late 1990s, largely they were manual still. But nevertheless, there was a whole classification structure for patents, which meant a lawyer could make a reasonable attempt at trying to identify whether there was prior art to something. So what we were tapping into was something a little bit different to that, and that is, what's the purpose of these patents? And on the one hand, you say, well, the purpose of them is to identify, this is what you own, Mr. or Mrs. Inventor, and here's the legal definition of what you own. They're written by lawyers to determine, okay, this is what you are able to take to the world, and nobody can copy you. But the other purpose of the patents then is for the engineers, people who are looking for solutions, and they want to be able to see what's out there, partly to make sure they don't infringe on other people's
Yeah, yeah.
patents. But they encounter the legalese, the stuff written by the lawyers, which, despite the fact the lawyers will keep telling me, "Oh no, it's not written for other lawyers." The reality is that engineers look at that stuff and say, "I've got no idea what this is." And so nature abhors a vacuum. So when with that realization, there's a body of people here who need the information that's in these documents, but it's unreadable, then along comes a solution in the form of people whose job now becomes to summarize and translate the legalese into engineering English that an engineer can competently read through and say, oh, yeah, that's interesting. That's relevant to me. That's not relevant to me. So what we were able to do was to tap into those people. And perhaps not surprisingly, the majority of those people, like in the late 90s, were based in India.
Right. Yeah.
So
For
where you've
economic
got people
reasons. Yeah.
for economic reasons, but also very smart, knowledgeable people. And so therefore, if you say to a group of those people, okay, your job now is to go and read lots and lots of patents and summarize them, then they'll do that job. Yeah, and
So, okay, I can get that you had this labour pool of the right potential. But what about teaching them the principles in this reverse engineering business? That can't have been easy. Did you
no,
systematize that?
we did. Yeah, so it's painful start, I would say. So we had a process whereby somebody would go on a quiz workshop, effectively, that we run internally, to show them this what contradiction is. These are the inventive principles. And then, if you like, an apprenticeship that said, okay, well, when you're summarizing those patterns, then you now need to be looking for the contradictions, and you need to be looking for the strategies that underpin those inventive steps that inventors have made. And someone will then come along and check your homework and see whether you've done it right or not. So initially that was me. And then you gradually build up a pool of people who can then train other people.
Right. Okay. Okay. So I can imagine that would have been quite an eventful period in your life, really.
Yeah, it was, looking back on it. I mean, yes, now we've got the software tools and the AI that can do the job, massively more quickly. Then, it just felt like a Stone Age, and it looks like it was the Stone Age. But that's the way that it was done originally, and that's the only way we could start doing it. Now unfortunately, we have electronic text to work with, whereas the original Soviet research was all paper.
So it would be fascinating to find out what those people highly trained in inventive principles have gone on to do.
Yes, so the end of the core team was partly, again, we could see very early on, you've got to automate this as much as possible, because it's not a great job for anybody anyway. But what then comes along and accelerates that is that, I mean, we were based in Bangalore, and so big high tech hub, and we were a small company. So at the peak, we had 80 people, and increasing the big companies surrounding us, starting to approach us first of all as clients. Can you help us to solve this problem? But then once they realise what we've got, we start to become the training department for Philips and Honeywell and Infosys and Wipro, etc.
So
Because
they
what
were stealing your people,
they
basically.
were basically, yeah. So we were training people to be good, analysts and good, for his people, in many ways. And then they would just move to a big company.
But I bet they weren't used in the
I'm
continuing
su- I'm
role. They'd be
sh- I'm
used as
sure they
software
weren't.
analysts.
No,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sure they
yeah, yeah.
weren't. Yeah, I think they were. Yeah, I think they were seen as people with a good analytical brain, that could do decent engineering work.
So tell me a bit more about the move to automation,
So
because
once
you
you've,
must have been quite an early adopter in that type of thing, were you?
I think, and again, I think it was driven by practical needs, really. Of this is expensive research to do, and once you've been the person that's been checking the homework of students, then you realise that there are clear patterns. There are patterns in what to look for in the patents.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. So, I mean, in theory, a patent in the background description, the inventor is supposed to describe, here's a problem, here's how everybody else has failed to solve this problem, and here's how I've magically done it. So in that section of the patent, you should be able to identify the contradiction and the overall strategy they've used. So you know which parts of the document to go and look in. You know how to, you learn very quickly how to find the contradictions. Yeah. So you bring along semantic, these days called natural language processes, that will pick out the verbs and the subject of a sentence and the object of a sentence. And once you can do that, then you're well on your way to be able to identify the contradictions.
Ah, so is this a skill that you teach in your courses, or they got to buy
No,
one of your bits of software to do it?
yeah, I think it's been one of those things where um, it's kind of like the secret sauce on the one hand. So we're very happy to share people the tools, the outcomes of the research, but the research itself, the algorithms, those very definitely are not available to the public. So that kind of trade secret is the way of protecting that
Ah, so
stuff.
that's your IP then, Daryl.
Yes, I think again it's partly by accident. We've most of the things we've evolved over the years have happened, um, partly at least by accident. So we've got a piece of software called Apollo Sigma, which has been around for a long time. I think we built the first version of it probably 2005, and its job was to identify the good patents. So the ones that we will analyze manually to identify inventor principles, etc. Um, but that software was pretty temperamental. So I'm pretty certain the original idea was, okay, well we'll offer this Apollo Sigma software to clients. They'll be able to use it. But it was just too temperamental, and I mean, it still is too temperamental. So all we were able to do is say, okay, we'll offer it as a service. So tell us which patterns you want analyzing, and we'll put them through the software, and we'll put up with all of the quirks
So
that
you
exist
needed
in it.
a few in-house people to kind of sit along to get the
Yeah,
turn the
yeah,
handles. Okay.
yeah. So that's kind of worked for us today. But yeah, Apollo Sigma was the foundation of let's automate the process of identifying what's a good quality pattern versus a less good quality pattern.
So right, I'm going to come back round to the why then, uh, and see if I can remember what it was. So, because it's a bloody big number. But yes, it just right. Let's ask another question. What's the minimum number of samples you could have taken to get a very similar result?
Um, I would say it's probably between the tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands. But again, I think it's one of those things where you say, okay, well, I want to I'm presenting more evolved information. So part of that is context. Part of that then is also I want to be able to again, if I put myself in the position of an inventor that's going to use the tool, I want to be able to identify and use the strategy that have worked most frequently for other people. So frequency of use of a principle is useful. If I'm short of time and I want to solve the problem quickly, then I can just look at the top of the list of ranking for that particular problem and look at those principles, and I have to be pretty certain I'm going to get a good enough solution that will solve the contradiction using those top rank ones. But then my next level of desire is, when you show me the patents, so the principles that have given the best patents, so the highest quality patents. So I think one of the holy grails in the IP world is this a high quality patent or not? And so that's what Apollo Sigma was set up to do. And there, as the user now, I want to know that which of the invented principles for this particular problem type have given the highest quality solutions. And again, you're back to context now, but that's a much more difficult challenge to solve with the AI, with the software tools. But again, the fact that it's context specific means that I think still we need to keep doing the research and keep analysing new patents as they're published.
I'll give you that one, Daryl. I'll give you that one. But I think what this illustrates for me is your predilection for getting bored with stuff. And because you're covering such an ambitious range of things, and of necessity, if you go into a new area, you've got to go in all guns blazing and give it your full attention. And of necessity, again, that you end up leaving in those areas that you've attacked rather, or addressed. Lots of loose ends. You could probably set umpteen MSCs or whatever PhDs. So you've kind of been trailblazing, and I'm trying to come up with an analogy here and failing badly. But if you were doing up the house, you'd be showing around your house. You say, "Well, I had a really good idea for doing up this room." And I was kind of, I was 80% through it. And I thought, well, I'll do the bathroom now. And
Yes.
I know it would be a very exciting house. It wouldn't go down too well one of those shows they have on television, because they like
true. Yeah,
so,
I'm not sure whether it's a better analogy, but one of my books that I was reading on my holiday last week was a collection of Douglas Adams' archive material, and the impression that I'm left with reading through that, I mean, it's a big chunky book, kind of a coffee table book, but big chunky. It's got lots of stuff in it. Is, boy, there's a guy who was great at starting stuff, but appalling
right.
at finishing anything. And so I think he was. I think I can sense some of those traits in myself. It's much easier to start new things, rather than get through all the grit needed to finish stuff. So I think I need to pick and choose which things I'm going to finish. And these days, be much better at picking things which you're going to start in the first place. But I think with the pattern research, because it's so heavily automated these days, it's kind of, I don't need to worry about it too much. Yeah, so my role in that now is pretty much looking for exceptions, things that don't fit. So in the e-zine every month, we do another month, and occasionally I'll set the challenge that says, okay, find me a pattern which is a good pattern, which doesn't follow any of the recommendations that the contradiction tools would point us towards. And
Right. Yeah.
those are the things that kind of switch my brain on.
But it's my assertion that there's 1,000 people out there that if they just achieved that one thing that you've achieved with the patent database, they would have focused on it, finished it, publicized it, TED talked it, etc.,
Yeah.
and made a massive career out of it. And there is in your presentation 11.5 million. I go, don't believe it.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I think, I mean, it's another of our overriding contradictions, isn't it? Which is, yeah, the world loves specialists. And so you look at almost all the innovation authors on the bookshelves behind me. What they've done is they've focused on one part of the story. I think I've always been the person that says no. It's the meaning of life. It's the theory of everything kind of thing. Which says, okay, well, that's what we should be interested in. And just because there's no money in doing that, then so be it. I'm not desperately interested in money. If I can get enough money to keep doing the research and adding more jigsaw pieces, then fantastic. That's what I'm going to do.
So our homework, Daryl, is to work out how we market such a diverse and slightly frayed at the edges portfolio, shall we say?
Yes, indeed. Yes. I think it's one of those things where if you look at the 2% of innovators who were successful versus the 98% who were not, then timing is everything. So understanding when the market's ready for you, and I think that the tide towards the generalist is very definitely heading in our direction now. So last century of specialist. All the discussion we've had previously about horizontal wisdom is being able to connect the dots between different domains, and we're just ahead of that. That's that wave, I would say. But that wave is unstoppably heading in our direction, because there are too many problems in the world that you can only solve if you can connect the dots between the specialisms.
Well, I totally agree with you on that one, Darryl. It's a good place to, because I think we've got exponential change that's happening faster and faster, and you've got to really stand back to appreciate it. And I'm sure I don't fully appreciate it, but
is this your link into Harari now?
Oh well, let it be. Let it be so.
So I think in theory, his success has been he's the historian that's kind of stood back and said, I'm not interested in that 40-year period, the Napoleonic Wars. I'm interested in everything. And on that level, I kind of admire the guy for having that kind of ambition. I think I'm less enamored than you are of him, because I see the world through the contradiction lens, and I don't think he gets contradictions at all. And I think in stepping back, this whole idea of authoritarian to humanism to the algorithm now is certainly, you could say, okay, well, he's identified those S-curve shifts at a societal level. But if you don't understand contradictions, then you can't project forward into the future. So all of his stuff about the algorithm taking over, I think it's not driven by any understanding of how complex systems work, and certainly the emergent behavior. And again, it's very easy to extrapolate along trends, but that's not how the future works. The future works when one trend conflicts with another one, and he totally doesn't get that. But I think my biggest beef with him these days is being adopted by people like the WEF as a spokesperson for them, because it feels to me like they've said, okay, we need a spokesperson that's going to talk about history and the big picture. and he seems to be pretty good at it. So let's make him a puppet of us and make sure he says all the right things. So all the stuff we've done about predicting the future says that it doesn't look right on most fronts. Totalitarianism is the most likely option. Different flavors thereof, but that's the most likely option. And I think him, Harari, and his talk about the algorithm is basically one of those flavors of totalitarianism. And I think the people that are sponsoring him are the ones that are betting on people like him popularizing a message which favors their version of totalitarianism.
Oh my goodness. So let's just kind of slow this down a bit because my brain doesn't work that fast. So what? Daryl recapped it very, very quickly. I'm going to recap it in slightly more detail. So he's saying that where's authority? So Charlotte like this. Where is the power? Okay, in people's lives, and the same back in the dark days, it was the church or whatever religion they subscribed to, and what was authority? What was right? How do you live your life? How do you deal with various situations in daily life, like having a partner or how many partners you have. You basically go to a religious authority, be it a priest, be it a book, see what it says, and there you go. That's what you do. Yeah. So then along comes the Enlightenment, and people start questioning religion, and there's a whole lot of people thinking of new ways of doing things, and they kind of come to the conclusion that people should do what they feel right rather than being a mechanical, written down way of doing things. So they start questioning the truth as given to them, and it basically ends up with right is subjective. It's what people they can do what the hell they like, provided it doesn't hurt anyone else. Yeah. So
yeah,
and this is
yeah.
He's now saying that the authority is going to be the algorithm because basically the algorithm knows more than we do because it's got access to all the information on the internet, and it knows more about ourselves than we do because it's got big data. It knows what people like us, and we're not as unique as we might think, do in these certain situations. So given access to all this big data and given access to increasingly good metrics on that allows it to classify people into different groups. Ultimately, the way it's going is if we've all got heart rate sensors, it can actually track our emotions. This thing, the internet, the web, Facebook, whoever, in real time. And the combination of knowing who we are and knowing on aggregate what makes people like us happy and what we like to read, who we like to marry, etc. It'll give us decisions. We'll ask it, and we already are. And the example of already are relying on technology to literally direct us is Google Maps, which it's not been around that long. It seemed like absolute magic. It took me. I was a late adopter because I didn't believe it was actually possible to do such a thing. And now I just look at the screen and follow where it goes. And there's all sorts of skills. It's hard to believe that we used to kind of go abroad and catch aeroplanes and find our way with maps and get lost and not be able to ring people and say, help, come and pick me up. So that strikes, that's definitely happening. We are becoming reliant on that. And if it was better than it is, I'd be quite happy to ride a lot more. For instance, sleeping apps, bloody hopeless. If I trusted them, I'd probably start acting on what they said. So that's why I liked it, because well, here's another thing. Here's another thing. This goes to what is a genius, which is one of the things I'm interested in. I've got my theories, but if you take someone like Darwin, I mean, he did have an opportunity to go on a special trip with, sailing to the Galapagos and everything.
Mm.
But I think he would have come to the same conclusions if he hadn't done that, because he just looked at stuff in his back garden or in the farms and things like that, stuff that everybody had access to, and he came to these conclusions. And I think that's really cool. And I think Yuval does the same. He just kind of, he doesn't have any access to any special magical stuff that we can't access. He just thinks about the world in a different way. So that's a vote for him.
Well, yeah, does he think? I think he sees a big picture that most people don't see, and so yeah, so identifying that evolution from the authority figure to the humanism to the algorithm. Yeah, I can. Okay, great. You've seen that. I don't think he's the only person that's seen that. I think he's just the figurehead that's
Spokesman,
been
yeah.
the one that's been pushed to the front of the crowd and said, "Okay, you go and tell everybody that." But I think in what he completely doesn't understand again is the contradiction stuff. So we all use Google Maps, and I think there's the algorithm, but it's the algorithm applied to a complicated problem. And I think as soon as you cross the complex boundary, then it doesn't work anymore. And we're back to S curves again. When a discontinuity's happened, then until you recognize that it has happened. So for example, as soon as you change anything, it changes people's behavior. And that realizes a whole bunch of new problems which you hadn't thought about yet, law of unintended consequences. But that's the contradiction stuff. That's the bit that your model has to have. Otherwise, you just keep falling into the law of unintended consequences trap.
Right. Okay. Okay. So a wise person told me once that as soon as you have more than one human involved, you've got a complex problem. I think that might be you,
Yes,
Darryl.
I think it might be
Okay.
me.
So the other example that he gave in his speech, which I'll put in the show notes, a link to, is finding a partner.
Yeah.
Okay. So that, going back to what you said earlier, that strikes me as one of life's discontinuities, having to
Mm.
spend a large
Yeah.
portion of your life with another person. So he basically outlined the scenario where, using all the stuff I talked, big data and emotional feedback and whatever, all sorts of biological feedback, they would say, rather than using Tinder, which is a dating app, or rather than doing it the way we did randomly back in the day, back in the 60s or whatever, climbing through windows or whatever, uh, you could get a
Still the best strategy.
recommendation. You could get a recommendation to say these people are suitable. So I can buy that. I could see how I think the current way of finding a life partner is well, judging by the divorce rate, not very good. Yeah, I could see how algorithms and big data could make that process better. So here we have a contradiction in a
We do.
complex situation, and a solution that might not be perfect, but is a definite advance. So what's not to love about that, Darryl?
It's so I've heard him tell that part of the story that the algorithm's going to tell you that it's 87% confidence you should marry that person there. Um, but the moment you've been given that piece of information, then that's changed the system. Yeah. And so the algorithm, I don't think is able to keep up with that. So is it better to have data or no data? Well, I think despite what Michael Gove might say, we've had enough of experts. Then it's better to have data. But when you talk about a complex emergent system, if you don't have data about the step changes, contradictions, then you might as well not have the data. So, one of my guilty pleasures is watching Married at First Sight, because I think
Oh,
there's
right. We're really getting into the into the weeds now, Daryl.
so I love the thought that a panel of experts look at the data, and they match pairs of people up that say, okay, well, yeah, you've never met this person, but this person's really good for
Oh,
you.
that's literally what the premise of the program is. I didn't
Yeah,
realize that.
yeah, no, you should watch it. It's especially the Australian version, which is brilliant. But it's brilliant because the experts are absolutely awful at matching people up. So it's just it's a series of brain wreck uh, relationships between people. But I don't. If you look at Married at First Sight on any country on the planet, if I don't think there are any success stories beyond even the end of the series. I can think of one where the couple stayed together and have had kids. But yeah, I mean, there's a situation where you've taken data, you've got experts who've they've been through the psychometric profile of these individuals and have matched these people up and said, yeah, these two people would be really great together, and it's an utter disaster.
Okay. Uh, I think, firstly, you're not talking about algorithms. You're talking about experts, which are human
No,
people.
it's experts looking at the algorithm, so they're just an intermediate, but the algorithm is there.
So, one potential cause for the bad outcomes might be they're not very good algorithms. And the other one is that if we look at the situation, I think, uh, actually, no, I suppose if you're doing it online, you would have an app, and that would be suggesting people. But I think you would kind of meet a bit first, and this, that's the complex stuff going on there. But I think after you've kind of knocked around a bit and maybe had a couple of suppers or whatever, I think you could use it as supplementary information. I can see people doing that. In fact, the lawyers will
Yeah,
probably get in there. The lawyers probably insist on
yeah. I'm
it.
not. We've talked about building a contradiction module which is able to anticipate those future contradictions, and I think if I was building the algorithm for relationships, then I'd certainly be building that capability into it. But I think that you get into a more profound problem at that point. There, is this for the good of the individual, or the individuals that are about to be paired with one another, or what's the algorithm really about? And I think that's where it all goes horribly wrong at a societal level. And I think that's where Harari's just been made this mouthpiece for the totalitarianists. I think that kind of capability needs to be used extremely carefully. And is it being done for the benefit of the individual? Is it being done for the benefit of the algorithm owner? And I think
Right. Okay. So, are you saying that he's promoting this as a good idea? Because that's exactly the opposite of what I think he was saying.
I don't know. I think he tries to stay neutral, but I think he, when you've got a WF T-shirt on, in effect, then you're not neutral. So I think that people like the WF are very keen to promote him as he's an academic. He's got his own brain. He's thought this through. He can think. He can see some of the implications. But I think in that sense, because we're missing the contradiction piece. He can't make any kind of sensible prediction about the future. And so I think as soon as he veers into the territory of the algorithm will be the dominant thing, then he's playing into the hands of his paymasters rather than this is what should happen.
Okay. So, you're coming over to me a little bit conspiracy theory with your dislike of
I,
the World Economic Forum. And
I think it's I think
how
it's
can
just,
he have a paymaster when he must have made absolute zillions of pounds or whatever shekels through his best-selling books? I would have thought he'd be very financially
I,
independent.
I think we live in a world again. Let's not get too far into conspiracy theories, but I think it's very easy this world to cancel an individual, and you know, I think the danger for anybody is back to our horizontal wisdom thing. If you you can very easily be proved wrong about stuff, you know, irrespective of whether you're right or actually wrong at all.
Yes, yes,
Um,
I'm with that.
so
Yeah,
I think there are agendas out there, and in that sense, I think he's a pawn. Yeah, you can say, okay, he's largely autonomous. He doesn't need the money, but I think he's been given a platform that could very easily be taken
so
away from him.
clarify for me what the agenda is then.
I think that I think society needs to have a discussion about what's the meaning of life and why we're here. Because I think what you end up with, if you don't have that discussion, what you end up with is the different flavors of totalitarianism. And the one that the WF um, is, is I think, veering towards is we're really rich people. So therefore, we're really smart. And therefore, we should be the ones that decide what the future is going to be. And I don't think, you know, being rich and high IQ is a good set of qualifications for that role.
Agreed, agreed. Well, look at you and me, Daryl.
So when we've talked about, you know, the okay, where is humanity going? I think that totalitarianism in its different flavors is the most likely. We've talked about humanocracy. There's a book that came out a couple of years ago called Citizens, which talks about um, the citizen story. So you know, people that have become the haves through, you know, good fortune or whatever, they shouldn't be the ones that decide. We should all decide what's meaningful, and it should be, yeah, the humans that decide, and we should do that as communities.
Right. So, oh, we've got to go now. So, you referenced another historian that you're more of a fan of. So, tell us
Yeah.
about him.
So Noel Ferguson is. Um, so I I've thought for a long time. Once we understood S curves and once we understood this whole idea of contradictions, and last year I had to write a chapter on the history of creativity, and that was quite um, useful going through that because you ask ChatGPT, for example, okay, tell me about the history of creativity, and it gives you utter nonsense. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, that's the whole of history. Yeah, the whole of history is utter nonsense because it's crammed full of bias. It's crammed full of historians that didn't understand S curves, didn't understand contradictions, and um, didn't understand. Which is always written by the winners, and so the whole of history is written by people that have got no qualifications to understand what history is. So, what are the qualifications? It needs to be somebody who understands contradictions, understands complex systems, understands therefore emergent behaviour. And is there any historian out there that's got any of those qualifications? And I think the answer is probably Niall Ferguson is the only one.
Ooh, okay. So, which of his books would you recommend?
So one that made it up there is The Square and the Tower.
Ah, ah. Well, I was looking at that. It's kind of it mentioned networks. I was going to poke into there.
Yes. Yeah. So again, I think, yeah, networks. It's networks is where you find the conflicts, and where you realise that you can't just extrapolate along trends because sooner or later this trend conflicts with this one, and you know that network effect that's kicked in there says until somebody solves that conflict, then nothing progresses. So the thing you need to be looking for through history is where were the networks, where were the conflicts, and how did those conflicts eventually get solved? And that's what he does. He doesn't use that language. So I think one of the lessons there is don't talk about S curves and contradictions, but he clearly understands them.
Oh, so I'll delve into that book, I think, Daryl. So
It's a I would say it's a very good read. I think all of his stuff is a good read, but that one in particular, that made the reachable bookshelf.
Okay, I think I've given you a good grilling today, and you've acquitted yourself very well. So congratulations.
Thank you for the
So
questions.
let's wrap it up. So goodbye, everybody. I hope to see you in the next episode.
Yeah, Guy. Thanks, Mike.
Okay. Cheers then. Bye
See you
bye.
soon. Bye.